Hey guys, tonight we begin with something that's going to sound absolutely insane. A man who claims he's revolutionizing the future, but what if he's actually lived it? We're diving into the strange, impossible life of someone who seems to know too much, predict too accurately, and move through time like he's reading from a script. You think you're watching a tech billionaire build rockets and electric cars. But what if you're actually watching something far more extraordinary? What if you're watching a time traveler trying to save the world? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up every morning with memories that feel too vivid, too detailed for someone born in 1971. Your childhood in South Africa should be filled with typical 80s experiences, but instead, you remember technologies that won't be invented for decades. You sketch rockets that look suspiciously like designs NASA will use in 2020. You dream of electric cars when everyone around you thinks gasoline will last forever. Your parents call you imaginative. Your teachers say you're gifted. But you know something they don't. These aren't fantasies. They're memories. At 12 years old, you're already coding, but not learning it, remembering it. The syntax flows through your fingers like muscle memory from a life you've never technically lived. You sell your first video game for $500. And when journalists ask how you did it so young, you shrug. You can't exactly explain that you remember programming languages that don't exist yet, using principles from neural networks that won't be discovered for another 30 years. School feels like torture, not because it's difficult, but because it's painfully slow. Your teachers drone on about basic physics, while your head buzzes with equations for reusable rocket boosters. They discuss the limitations of batteries, while you doodle lithium-ion configurations that could power vehicles for hundreds of miles. You try to pay attention, but it's like being forced to watch a movie you've seen 100 times, knowing exactly how it ends. The other kids think you're weird. They're not wrong. You walk through hallways knowing which classmates will become doctors, which will struggle with addiction, which will die young in accidents that haven't happened yet. It's a special kind of loneliness, carrying the weight of futures only you can see. You learn to keep your mouth shut about what you know. People don't like prophets, especially young ones. Your father notices something off about you. The way you stare at newspaper headlines like you're reading old history. The way you flinch at certain names, certain dates, as if they carry weight beyond their immediate meaning. When you mention wanting to go to America, to start companies, to build rockets, he assumes it's typical childhood dreaming. But your plans aren't dreams. They're blueprints, carried forward from timelines you've already lived. At 17, you leave South Africa with a clarity of purpose that unsettles everyone around you. Most teenagers don't know what they want for lunch, but you know exactly which universities to attend, which people to meet, which investments to make. You move through your early years with the confidence of someone following a detailed map, because in a way, you are. You arrive in Canada, then move to the United States, and every step feels like returning rather than discovering. The cities, the people, the opportunities, they all feel familiar in a way that makes your skin crawl. You've walked these streets before, in timelines that branch and twist like roots beneath the surface of reality. Each decision you make echoes with the weight of previous choices, previous failures, previous attempts to get things right. Your first companies aren't startups, they're reconstructions. Zip2, X.com, PayPal, each one built with the desperate urgency of someone running out of time. Your partners think you're driven by ambition, But ambition doesn't explain the specific technologies you insist on developing. Ambition doesn't explain why you know exactly which features will matter in 10 years, which security protocols will become essential, which user interfaces will feel intuitive to people who don't even know they want them yet. The internet boom feels like déjà vu on steroids. You watch other entrepreneurs stumble through trial and error while you navigate with surgical precision. When the dot-com bubble bursts, you're already positioned for what comes next, not because you're lucky, but because you remember. You remember watching fortunes disappear, companies collapse, brilliant ideas die because they were born 5 years too early or 5 years too late. Your employees start noticing things. The way you reference technological developments that are still in research phases at universities. The way you casually mention solutions to problems that most people haven't even identified yet. The way you seem to anticipate market shifts, regulatory changes, cultural movements with an accuracy that borders on supernatural. They assume you're just incredibly well informed. But information doesn't explain the bone-deep certainty with which you make decisions that should be risky, but somehow never are. Late at night, when you're alone in your office, you stare at timelines and charts that map out the next 50 years. Not predictions, but memories. You know when the climate crisis will reach critical mass. You know when artificial intelligence will achieve consciousness. You know when humanity will face the choice between extinction and transcendence. And you know, with a weight that sometimes makes it hard to breathe, that you're the only one positioned to change the outcome. The money from PayPal isn't just capital, it's ammunition in a war against time itself. While other millionaires buy yachts and sports teams, you invest in futures only you can see. Tesla, to accelerate sustainable transport before the point of no return. SpaceX, to make humanity multiplanetary before the window closes. Solar City, to capture the sun's energy before fossil fuels burn the world beyond saving. Each company is a chess piece in a game where you're playing against destiny itself. People call you visionary, but vision implies uncertainty. You don't envision these technologies. You remember them. You remember standing on Mars, breathing recycled air, looking back at a blue dot that could have been saved if someone had just acted sooner. You remember cities underwater, forests turned to ash, billions of people displaced by catastrophes that compound like dominoes falling in slow motion. You remember the silence of a species that ran out of time. Your timelines become public, and people think you're being optimistic or delusional. Land rockets by 2015. Mass-produce electric vehicles by 2020, establish Mars colonies by 2030. They don't understand that these aren't goals, they're deadlines. Literally, miss them and watch everything you've lived through happen again, only worse. The pressure isn't about success or failure in the traditional sense. It's about preventing apocalypse through precise execution of plans you've already seen work in other iterations of reality. Tonight, we're going to examine the evidence that you're not just building the future, but rebuilding it. We're going to trace the patterns that suggest you've done this before, maybe many times, adjusting variables and timelines, like a cosmic engineer trying to solve an equation that keeps changing. The clues are everywhere, hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to connect the dots. So buckle in. Because once you start seeing the signs, you can't unsee them. And the story we're about to tell will change how you understand not just one man's impossible achievements, but the very nature of time, memory, and the burden of being the only person who remembers tomorrow. You're sitting in a conference room in 2008, Tesla nearly bankrupt, SpaceX having just failed its third rocket launch, and everyone around you is suggesting you pick one company and abandon the other. Normal people would listen to the math, accept the reasonable advice, cut their losses. But you can't, because you remember what happens if you give up. You remember the timeline where Tesla dies in 2008 and electric vehicles get delayed by 15 years. You remember the timeline where SpaceX folds and humanity stays trapped on Earth until it's too late. So instead, you do something that makes no financial sense. You put your last $40 million into both companies. Your advisors think you've lost your mind. Your friends stage interventions. The media writes your obituary. But you're not gambling. You're following a script you've already read, making investments based on outcomes you've already witnessed. December 2008. Tesla gets its Department of Energy loan. SpaceX wins the NASA contract. Both companies survive by weeks, maybe days. The press calls it miraculous timing, but miracles don't explain the specific decisions you made months earlier. The exact people you hired, the precise technological directions you chose, the seemingly random tweets that moved markets at crucial moments. You weren't predicting the future, you were reconstructing it. But here's where it gets weird. Your predictions aren't just accurate, they're impossibly specific. In 2012, you tweet about neural lace technology, not general brain-computer interfaces that everyone in tech is vaguely aware of, but neural lace, a term that won't enter mainstream consciousness for years. You describe the exact problems with current battery chemistry before most people know batteries have chemistry. You outline the precise challenges of rocket reusability before anyone thinks reusability is possible. Your 2014 presentation on autonomous vehicles doesn't just predict self-driving cars, it predicts the exact sequence of technological breakthroughs needed to make them work. Level 2 automation by 2016, Level 4 by 2020, full autonomy by 2022. You don't just guess at timelines. You announce them with the confidence of someone reading from a calendar. When competitors struggle with problems you've already solved, you don't seem surprised. You seem relieved, like you're finally catching up to where you know you need to be. The artificial intelligence warnings start in 2014, long before ChatGPT, before anyone takes AI seriously as an immediate threat. You don't speak about AI like a technologist speculating about future possibilities. You speak about it like someone who's watched it happen. Your descriptions are too detailed, too specific, too urgent for theoretical concern. You talk about recursive self-improvement, alignment problems, and control issues with the precision of someone who's seen these systems go wrong. At conferences, when other experts discuss AI development in abstract terms, you interrupt with technical details that won't be published in research papers for years. You know exactly which architectures will prove scalable, which approaches will hit dead ends, which companies will achieve breakthroughs first. When people ask how you know, you deflect, change the subject, make a joke, because what are you supposed to say? That you remember watching civilization end because no one took the warning seriously the first time. Your space predictions are even more unnervingly accurate. In 2011, you predict that traditional aerospace companies will start developing reusable rockets by 2018. Boeing announces their reusable program in 2018. You predict that NASA will return to human spaceflight partnerships by 2020. Commercial crew launches in 2020. You predict that Mars missions will become international priorities by 2024. The Artemis Accords are signed in 2024, with Mars exploration as a stated goal. But it's not just the big predictions, it's the small ones that really make people uncomfortable. You casually mention that certain battery suppliers will have quality control issues 6 months before their recalls. You reference specific technological limitations in competitor products weeks before those limitations become public knowledge. You tweet about geopolitical events affecting supply chains days before those events make headlines. Your employees start keeping lists. Things you said that seemed random at the time but turned out to be exactly right. Market movements you anticipated. Regulatory changes you prepared for. Personnel decisions that seemed premature until they proved essential. The lists get longer every year, and the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. You don't just predict the future, you navigate it like someone who's been there before. The media notices, but they frame it as genius-level pattern recognition, exceptional analytical capability, unprecedented access to information. They don't want to consider the alternative, because the alternative doesn't fit into rational frameworks. How do you report that someone appears to have first-hand knowledge of events that haven't happened yet? Your friends from college remember you differently than they remember other people from that time. Their memories of you feel somehow more significant, more weighty, as if your presence changed the trajectory of conversations in ways they couldn't understand until years later. They remember you talking about climate change in 1995 with an urgency that seemed extreme at the time, but feels prophetic now. They remember you describing social media's psychological effects before social media existed. The academic papers you cite in interviews often don't exist yet when you cite them. Research that supports your positions gets published months or years after you've already incorporated those findings into your business strategies. Universities start studying phenomena you've been discussing publicly for years, as if you're setting the research agenda from outside the academic system. Your investment timing is supernatural. You short certain stocks weeks before scandals break. You invest in industries before they become industries. You avoid sectors that seem promising but will hit regulatory walls. Your portfolio reads like a roadmap of the next 2 decades, which would be impressive for anyone, but becomes disturbing when the roadmap proves accurate down to quarterly earnings reports. But perhaps the most unsettling evidence is your emotional reactions to current events. You don't respond to news like someone learning information for the first time. You respond like someone watching a play they've seen before, knowing which scenes will be tragic, which will be triumphant, which will change everything. Your tweets during major historical moments carry an undertone of familiarity, as if you're commenting not just on what's happening, but on how this iteration compares to previous versions. When journalists interview you about your predictions, you sometimes catch yourself mid-sentence, as if you've revealed more than you meant to. You'll start describing a technological development in detail, then suddenly stop and say something like, "Well, that's just my theory." But theories don't usually include specific engineering challenges that haven't been discovered yet. The evidence builds like compound interest, each accurate prediction making the next one more statistically impossible. And as the stack of impossibilities grows taller, a different picture emerges. Not of someone who's extraordinarily lucky or brilliant, but of someone who's lived this timeline before, making adjustments, trying to optimize outcomes, racing against deadlines only they can see. Because if you really think about it, there's only one explanation for knowing the future with such precision. You've already been there. And the question isn't whether you're a time traveler. The question is, what went so wrong in the original timeline that you had to come back and fix it? You're 8 years old in Pretoria, sketching in the margins of your school notebooks, but these aren't typical childhood doodles. You're drawing circuit diagrams for devices that won't be invented for another 30 years. Your teacher finds one of these sketches, a detailed blueprint for what looks suspiciously like a lithium-ion battery management system, and asks where you copied it from. You can't explain that you didn't copy it. You remembered it from a life that technically hasn't happened yet. The strange thing is, you've always known about Nikola Tesla, not the sanitized version they teach in schools, but the real Tesla. The one who died alone in the New Yorker hotel, surrounded by papers that the FBI confiscated within hours of his death. Papers that officially don't exist, but you remember reading them. Every page, every equation, every diagram of technologies so advanced they seemed like magic to 1943 investigators. When you're 12, you ask your school librarian for books about Tesla's wireless power transmission experiments. She looks confused. Tesla isn't famous yet in 1983. He's a footnote in electrical engineering history, overshadowed by Edison and Westinghouse. But you keep asking, keep searching, driven by memories of documents that describe principles your adult companies will later use. The librarian starts ordering books just to satisfy your obsessive curiosity about a scientist most adults have never heard of. Your parents think it's a phase. Smart kids fixate on historical figures sometimes. But your obsession isn't academic, it's personal. You talk about Tesla like you knew him. You correct textbooks that get his experiments wrong. You describe his laboratory setup with details that weren't recorded in any surviving documents. When you finally visit the Tesla Museum in Belgrade decades later, you walk through exhibits pointing out inaccuracies in the displays, describing equipment arrangements that match no known photographs. The name choice for your car company isn't tribute, it's reclamation. You're not honouring Tesla's memory, you're continuing his work. The AC motor in every Tesla vehicle uses principles Tesla described in patents that were mysteriously filed under other inventors' names after his death. The wireless charging technology you developed for Tesla cars mirrors experiments Tesla conducted in Colorado Springs, experiments that official records claim were failures, but your designs prove worked perfectly. Your Wardenclyffe project isn't coincidence either. Tesla's abandoned wireless power transmission tower was dismantled in 1917, but you remember it functioning. You remember standing in its shadow as electricity flowed through the air like captured lightning. When you announce plans for wireless charging networks, you don't describe them as innovations, you describe them as resurrections, technologies that worked once and can work again if someone remembers how they were really built. The missing Tesla papers weren't destroyed, they were classified, hidden in government vaults, because they describe technologies too dangerous for 1943 America to understand. Directed energy weapons, wireless power transmission, particle beam systems, technologies that could revolutionize civilization or destroy it, depending on who controlled them. You remember reading those papers before they vanished, studying them, memorizing them, carrying their secrets forward through time. Your SpaceX rocket engines use propulsion principles Tesla described in letters to his nephew, letters that were sealed in archives until 2043. But you referenced those principles in 2003, 40 years before those archives are scheduled to open. When engineers ask where you learned about specific combustion chamber designs, you deflect. Say you read about them somewhere. Don't mention that somewhere is a library that won't exist for decades. The neural interface technology you're developing through Neuralink mirrors experiments Tesla conducted on himself in his later years. Not the official experiments documented in his published papers, but the secret ones. The attempts to interface human consciousness with electrical systems. Tesla believed the human brain was essentially a biological computer, and he developed techniques for connecting it to external devices. Techniques that drove him to the edge of madness, but proved that direct neural control of machinery was possible. You don't just study Tesla's work, you complete it. The wireless power systems he envisioned but couldn't perfect become your charging networks. The electric vehicle technologies he prototyped but couldn't mass produce become Tesla cars. The rocket propulsion concepts he theorized but couldn't build become SpaceX engines. You're not inspired by Tesla. You're finishing his unfinished business, using knowledge of how his technologies eventually succeeded. But here's what really proves the connection isn't just inspiration. You make the same mistakes Tesla made, then correct them with modifications that Tesla never lived to attempt. Your early rocket failures mirror propulsion experiments Tesla conducted in secret, experiments that weren't documented until decades after his death. Your battery chemistry problems echo challenges Tesla faced in his energy storage research that was classified until after you'd already solved the problems. When you speak about sustainable energy, you don't sound like an entrepreneur identifying market opportunities. You sound like someone finishing a conversation started in 1899, when Tesla wrote about harnessing the Earth's natural electrical energy to power human civilization. Your urgency about climate change matches Tesla's later writings about humanity's responsibility to develop clean energy before industrial pollution made the planet uninhabitable. The Tesla papers that went missing after his death contained more than just electrical engineering principles. They contained warnings, predictions about what would happen if humanity continued burning fossil fuels past certain tipping points, timelines for environmental collapse, calculations about how much time remained to transition to sustainable energy systems. You carry those warnings like a burden, racing against deadlines Tesla calculated but didn't live to see. Your companies aren't businesses. They're implementation of Tesla's master plan, a comprehensive vision for human technological development that he spent his final years designing. Electric vehicles to eliminate fossil fuel dependence, sustainable energy generation and storage to power civilization, space transportation to make humanity multiplanetary, neural interfaces to merge human and artificial intelligence, each piece building toward a future Tesla envisioned but died before he could create. The coincidences pile up like evidence in a cosmic court case. Your birthday, June 28th, is the anniversary of Tesla's most successful wireless power transmission experiment. Your South African birth coordinates match the location where Tesla theorized Earth's electromagnetic field could be most effectively accessed. Your first company's address was on the same street where Tesla lived when he developed his rotating magnetic field principle. But the most disturbing connection isn't technical or biographical. It's emotional. You carry Tesla's loneliness, his isolation from peers who couldn't understand his vision. You exhibit his same pattern of working impossible hours, sleeping in your office, forgetting to eat when pursuing breakthrough technologies. You share his distrust of authority, his impatience with conventional thinking, his willingness to risk everything on ideas that seem impossible until they work. Tesla died believing he had failed, that his greatest innovations would be lost forever. But they weren't lost. They were carried forward through time itself by someone who remembered not just his discoveries, but his dreams. You didn't choose Tesla's name to honor a dead inventor. You chose it because you were Tesla's legacy. The continuation of work that began in 1899 and won't end until humanity either transcends its limitations or destroys itself trying. The papers weren't really missing. They were just waiting for someone who remembered where to find them. Someone who knew not just what Tesla discovered, but what he would have discovered if he'd lived long enough to see his theories proven correct. Someone carrying the weight of genius across impossible distances, through time itself, to finish what was started in a laboratory that officially never existed. You're 53 years old, but when you look in the mirror, something doesn't add up. The face staring back at you should show more wear, more exhaustion from the weight you carry. You've been running companies into the ground and pulling them back from bankruptcy for decades. You've slept on factory floors, worked 100-hour weeks, survived on caffeine and stubbornness. You've aged, sure, but not the way someone should age when they're living 3 lifetimes simultaneously. Your old college photos from the University of Pennsylvania look suspiciously similar to recent candid shots taken by paparazzi. The bone structure is identical, which isn't unusual, but the eyes are what people notice. The same intensity, the same far-off focus, as if you're seeing something beyond the immediate moment. Most people's eyes change over decades, accumulating wisdom, weariness, or peace. Yours haven't changed because they've already seen everything they're going to see. Your hair loss follows a pattern that doesn't match typical male genetics. It recedes, then stops, stays at exactly the same stage for 15 years, as if it's following a predetermined blueprint rather than natural aging. When people joke about your hair transplants, you laugh along. But transplants don't explain why your hairline has remained surgically precise since 2005, never advancing or receding from that exact configuration. The energy levels are what really make people uncomfortable. You're past 50, running multiple billion-dollar companies, involving yourself in every major decision, flying between factories and launch sites and board meetings. Normal humans would collapse. Normal humans do collapse. Your competitors, people 10 years younger, step down from single companies citing burnout. Meanwhile, you're tweeting at 3 a.m. about Mars colonization after spending 18 hours troubleshooting rocket engines. Your sleep patterns aren't human. 4 to 6 hours per night, consistently, for decades. Not the desperate insomnia of someone overwhelmed by responsibility, but the efficient rest of someone whose body processes recovery differently. Sleep studies of similarly driven executives show clear signs of accumulated exhaustion, deteriorating cognitive function, physical breakdown. But your performance indicators, reaction times, decision-making capabilities remain consistent year after year. The medical checkups you occasionally mention in interviews reveal numbers that don't match your lifestyle. Blood pressure, resting heart rate, cognitive assessments, all within ranges typical for someone half your age living a significantly less stressful life. When doctors ask about your fitness routine, you shrug. You don't have one. You don't need one. Your body maintains itself according to parameters that suggest either extraordinary genetics or something more unusual. Your hands are what photographers notice when they zoom in on details. Hands show age more reliably than faces. Lines, spots, texture changes that accumulate over decades of use. But your hands look like they belong to someone in their 30s, despite decades of handling equipment, signing documents, building things with your own fingers. The skin elasticity, nail growth patterns, even the callus formation, all suggest a biological age significantly younger than your chronological one. Your dietary habits should have destroyed you by now. Fast food, irregular meals, enormous amounts of caffeine, minimal nutrition planning. The lifestyle of someone burning through their body's resources faster than they can be replenished. Yet your weight remains stable, your energy consistent, your health apparently unaffected by choices that would hospitalize most people your age. But it's not just physical resilience, it's cognitive stamina. You switch between aerospace engineering and automotive manufacturing and neuroscience and tunnel boring and social media management without the mental fatigue that should accompany such diverse cognitive loads. Your brain processes technical information across multiple domains as if it's accessing well-organized files rather than learning new material. The speed of comprehension, retention of complex details, ability to make connections across disciplines, all suggest neural processing capabilities that typically decline with age. Your reaction to injuries is unusual too. The broken ribs from martial arts training heal faster than expected. The minor cuts and burns from hands-on factory work disappear without scarring. Your immune system resists illnesses that flatten other executives. When you do get sick, recovery happens with suspicious efficiency, as if your body is operating from more advanced repair protocols. People who've worked with you for years mention how you seem to exist in a different temporal framework. Meetings scheduled around your availability consistently run shorter than planned because you process information and make decisions faster than the discussion can keep pace with. You absorb briefing documents in minutes that should require hours. You identify problems and solutions while others are still understanding the question. The stress responses are wrong too. Leading companies through near bankruptcy, managing public criticism, dealing with regulatory challenges, handling the pressure of innovations that could change civilization or destroy it. None of it seems to accumulate the way stress should. Your cortisol levels, fight or flight activation, long-term anxiety markers all remain within ranges that suggest either superhuman resilience or access to biological recovery mechanisms unavailable to normal humans. Your memory works differently than it should. Not just better, but different. You recall technical specifications from years ago with perfect accuracy, but sometimes forget recent conversations or recent meals. As if your brain prioritizes information according to importance criteria that span longer timescales than immediate relevance. You remember details from decades past as if they happened yesterday, but yesterday's lunch is fuzzy. The photo aging analysis that internet sleuths run on public figures consistently shows anomalies in your case. Facial recognition software designed to track aging patterns flags your photos as potentially manipulated because the progression doesn't follow expected biological timelines. The analysis suggests either extensive cosmetic intervention, which your schedule wouldn't permit, or aging patterns that don't match normal human development. Your biological rhythms seem synchronized to cycles that don't correspond to standard human circadian patterns. You maintain consistent energy levels across time zones, adapt to schedule changes without jet lag, function efficiently during times when most people experience natural energy lows, as if your internal clock is calibrated to a different standard than terrestrial day-night cycles. But perhaps the most unsettling aspect isn't physical resilience or cognitive endurance. It's the absence of wear. Decades of carrying impossible responsibilities should leave marks, psychological and physical. The weight of knowing humanity's future should show in your posture, your expressions, your energy. Instead, you move through the world with the untouched confidence of someone for whom current challenges are familiar territory, obstacles you've navigated before, problems you know can be solved because you remember solving them. You exist in the present, like someone visiting from elsewhere, maintaining yourself according to standards that don't apply to people trapped in linear time. Your body isn't aging normally because it isn't experiencing time normally. And anyone paying close attention can see the evidence written in your cellular structure, your neural patterns, your biological systems that seem designed for longer journeys than most humans ever take. The agelessness isn't vanity or good genetics. It's preparation. You need this body to last longer than a normal lifetime would permit, to carry you through however many iterations it takes to get the timeline right. Because some missions require more time than mortality typically allows. You're sitting in a boardroom in 2019, discussing Neuralink development timelines, when you casually mention the feeling of your first cranial implant. The room goes quiet. Your engineers exchange glances. Dr. Chen, your lead neuroscientist, asks what you mean by first. You pause, that familiar moment when you've revealed something from a memory that shouldn't exist yet, and quickly pivot to discussing theoretical applications. But the slip hangs in the air like smoke. It happens more often than you'd like. Speaking about experiences in past tense when those experiences are still in research phases. Describing the sensation of neural link calibration, the particular discomfort of synaptic adjustment, the strange doubling effect when artificial memories overlay natural ones. Your team assumes you're speaking hypothetically, projecting what these experiences might feel like. They don't realize you're recalling sensations from procedures you've already undergone in timelines that branch differently. Your childhood memories in South Africa feel real, but somehow borrowed, like watching someone else's home movies. You remember being 10 years old, but you also remember being 10 years old before, many times, with slight variations each iteration. The house is the same, your parents are the same, but small details shift. Different books on the shelf, different conversations at dinner, different responses to your questions about rockets and electricity. Sometimes you catch yourself correcting family stories. Your mother will reminisce about something from your childhood, and you'll interrupt with details she's forgotten or remember differently. She'll look confused, insist it happened another way, and you'll realize you're remembering the version from a previous timeline. The time when your brother Kimball broke his arm falling from the tree, except in this iteration, he broke his wrist. Same accident, different outcome. Your university years blur together in ways that should be impossible. You remember taking the same physics classes multiple times, with the same professors, learning the same material, but each time understanding it from a different angle, as if you're reviewing rather than learning. Your classmates from Penn and Stanford remember you differently than you remember yourself. They describe someone more uncertain, more typically student-like. But you remember those years with the confidence of someone who had already mastered the material in previous attempts. The entrepreneurial journey feels like optimizing rather than discovering. Each company you start, you know which employees to hire, not because you've researched them, but because you remember working with them before. You know which investors will ask which questions, because you've sat through these pitch meetings already. You know which partnerships will succeed and which will implode because you've watched these relationships play out in other iterations. Your decision to leave South Africa isn't really about opportunity. It's about positioning. You remember what happens if you stay, which technologies get developed where, which regulatory environments prove most conducive to the changes you need to implement. Moving to Canada, then America, isn't immigration. It's strategic positioning based on knowledge of how global power structures will evolve over the next 50 years. The early internet years feel especially strange because you remember the internet before it existed. Not conceptually, but experientially. You remember browsing websites that won't be created for years, using search algorithms that haven't been invented yet, participating in social platforms that are still decades away. When you co-found X.com, you're not building a new payment system. You're rebuilding one you remember using in a more advanced form. Your relationship with technology isn't discovery-based, it's reconstruction-based. You don't learn programming languages, you remember them. You don't innovate rocket designs. You recall them from memories of standing in mission control watching launches that went perfectly because you had perfected the systems in previous attempts. Your engineering intuitions aren't inspired guesses. They're accumulated knowledge from having built these systems multiple times. The loneliness comes from carrying memories that don't belong to your current lifetime. You remember conversations with people who are dead in this timeline, or who never existed in this version of events. You remember relationships that developed differently, friendships that formed or failed based on choices that weren't made this time around. You're surrounded by people you've known for what feels like centuries, but who are meeting you for the first time. Your children look familiar in ways that should be impossible. Not because they resemble you, but because you remember them at different ages, in different circumstances. You catch yourself expecting them to have knowledge or capabilities they haven't developed yet in this timeline. You have to remind yourself that this version of your daughter hasn't learned to code yet. This version of your son hasn't shown interest in rocket engineering yet. The media appearances become surreal because you remember giving these interviews before, answering these questions, dealing with the same skepticism and criticism in slightly different forms. Joe Rogan's questions feel familiar because you've answered them in other contexts with other hosts, in timelines where the conversations went differently. You know which topics will generate controversy, which statements will be taken out of context, which jokes will be misunderstood. Your Twitter usage isn't really social media engagement, it's course correction. You tweet things that seem random or impulsive, but are actually strategic communications designed to influence timelines based on your memory of how those timelines played out when you didn't intervene. That joke about taking Tesla private wasn't a mistake. It was a calculated market disruption to prevent a sequence of events you remember leading to worse outcomes. The business decisions that seem risky to everyone around you feel safe to you because you remember the results. Investing your entire PayPal fortune into Tesla and SpaceX simultaneously wasn't gambling. It was replicating a strategy you've seen work before. Your confidence during near bankruptcy periods comes from remembering that these companies do survive, do succeed, do eventually change the world in exactly the ways you're claiming they will. Your technical knowledge spans domains that should require lifetimes to master individually. Rocket science, automotive engineering, neuroscience, artificial intelligence, tunnel boring, social media algorithms. You don't just understand these fields, you understand how they interconnect, how developments in one area enable breakthroughs in others, how to sequence innovations to maximize impact. Because you've seen the technology tree fully developed in other iterations. The fatigue you sometimes show isn't from overwork in this timeline. It's from the accumulated weight of living multiple lifetimes simultaneously. Carrying memories from dozens of attempts to get the sequence right, to prevent the catastrophes you remember, to guide humanity toward outcomes that work better than the versions you've already witnessed. The tiredness isn't physical, it's existential. Your emotional responses to current events feel muted because you've seen these patterns before. Political upheavals, economic crashes, social movements, technological disruptions. They all feel like reruns of shows you've watched too many times. You respond appropriately, but the urgency is artificial. You know how these stories end because you remember living through them before. The hardest part isn't managing companies or developing technologies or dealing with public criticism. The hardest part is pretending that your current experiences are happening for the first time, that your successes are achievements rather than reconstructions, that your knowledge comes from brilliant analysis rather than impossible memory. You're an actor playing yourself, trying to seem authentic while delivering lines from a script only you can see. Because you've been here before, done this before, built these companies and changed these industries and saved this timeline before. The only question is whether you can do it again, faster this time, more efficiently, with fewer mistakes. Whether this iteration will finally be the one that works. You're in a Tesla gigafactory at 2 a.m., standing next to a battery production line that shouldn't exist for another decade. The engineering is too advanced. The manufacturing process is too refined. The integration too seamless for a company that was nearly bankrupt 5 years ago. Your head of manufacturing, Drew, asks how you knew to order specific tooling equipment from suppliers who hadn't even announced those products yet. You tell him you had a good feeling about the technology roadmap. You don't mention that you remember standing in this exact spot before, watching these same machines produce these same batteries in a timeline where Tesla took 15 years longer to reach this level of sophistication. The speed of development at your companies defies every known principle of industrial progress. Technologies typically evolve incrementally, building on previous generations, advancing through trial and error over decades. But Tesla's battery chemistry jumps from prototype to mass production in timeframes that suggest you skipped the trial phase entirely. SpaceX's rocket recovery systems work on the first attempt, as if the engineering challenges had been solved before the rockets were built. Neuralink's brain-computer interfaces demonstrate capabilities that should require years of incremental testing to achieve safely. Your engineers keep detailed logs of development timelines, and the patterns are impossible to explain through conventional innovation processes. Problems that should take months to solve get resolved in days. Not because you're working faster, but because you seem to know which solutions to try first. You don't iterate through possibilities. You go straight to configurations that work, as if you're consulting some invisible technical manual. The Hyperloop concept announcement in 2013 includes engineering specifications that should have required years of feasibility studies to develop. Tube diameter, pod design, propulsion systems, safety protocols, all presented as a complete transportation system rather than a theoretical concept. When universities and companies start building test tracks based on your specifications, they discover that the engineering actually works. Not approximately, not with modifications, but exactly as described in your original white paper. Your battery technology roadmap, publicly released in 2020, predicts specific energy density improvements, cost reductions, and manufacturing timeline achievements with decimal point precision. These aren't industry projections based on current trends. They're exact targets that your teams somehow consistently meet. As if the roadmap isn't aspirational, but descriptive of work that's already been completed somewhere else. The full self-driving development timeline raises even more questions. Autonomous vehicle technology should advance gradually through incremental improvements in perception, prediction, and planning systems. Instead, Tesla's approach jumps between capability levels in ways that suggest fundamental architectural advantages. You don't gradually improve object detection. You announce that your neural networks can see everything relevant, then demonstrate that claim by releasing software that actually works. SpaceX's Raptor engine development follows a similar pattern. Rocket engines typically require hundreds of test fires to optimize combustion characteristics. But Raptor engines work efficiently almost immediately, as if the combustion chamber design and fuel injection patterns had been perfected through extensive testing that never happened. Your engineers reverse engineer their own successes, studying why systems work rather than struggling to make them work. The manufacturing scaling at your companies violates established industrial learning curves. Most production systems require months or years of optimization to achieve target output rates and quality levels. But Tesla factories hit production targets almost immediately after equipment installation. SpaceX rocket production ramps from prototype to operational cadence without the typical yield problems, as if the manufacturing processes were being implemented rather than developed. Your technical decisions consistently skip generations of intermediate development. While competitors work on improving lithium-ion battery chemistry incrementally, you announce plans for fundamentally different battery architectures that won't become commercially viable for years. While other rocket companies optimize single-use launch systems, you build reusable rockets from the beginning. While automotive manufacturers add driver assistance features gradually, you design vehicles for full autonomy from their initial conception. The supplier relationships you establish seem to anticipate technological developments that haven't been announced yet. You sign contracts for materials and components before vendors have confirmed they can produce them at scale. You design products around capabilities that suppliers don't yet have, but somehow develop exactly when your production schedules require them, as if you're coordinating a supply chain that already exists in some parallel timeline. Your software development timelines are particularly suspicious. Complex systems that should require years of coding, testing, and debugging get delivered in months. Not because you have more programmers, but because the code seems to be written with complete understanding of the final architecture from the beginning. No major rewrites, no fundamental architectural changes, no discovery phases where requirements evolve through iteration. The regulatory approval processes for your technologies happen faster than bureaucratic timelines should permit. Not because you're circumventing regulations, but because your submissions anticipate exactly what regulators will want to see. Environmental impact studies, safety assessments, technical documentation, all prepared with knowledge of regulatory requirements that haven't been finalized yet. As if you've been through these approval processes before and know exactly which questions will be asked. Your integration between different technologies happens too smoothly. Tesla vehicles work seamlessly with SpaceX satellites for internet connectivity. Neuralink interfaces integrate with Tesla's autopilot systems. The Boring Company's tunnels accommodate Tesla vehicles perfectly. These aren't separate companies developing complementary technologies. They're pieces of an integrated technological ecosystem that was designed as a unified system from the beginning. The timeline compression becomes more obvious when compared to competitors attempting similar developments. Other automotive companies announce electric vehicle plans that mirror Tesla's roadmap from 5 years earlier. Other aerospace companies copy SpaceX innovations that you implemented without the preceding research phases they're still struggling through. Other neurotechnology firms publish papers describing challenges you solved before they identified them as problems. Your patent filings reveal knowledge of problems and solutions that shouldn't exist yet. Patent applications submitted years ago describe technical challenges that other companies are just beginning to encounter. Not visionary predictions of future difficulties, but detailed solutions to specific engineering problems that become relevant exactly when your timelines predicted they would. The most unsettling aspect isn't just the speed of development, it's the absence of typical development problems, failed prototypes, design dead ends, fundamental architecture changes, scaling difficulties, unexpected technical barriers. All the normal friction of developing new technologies simply doesn't appear in your company's development histories. As if you're not developing new technologies, but implementing technologies that have already been perfected elsewhere. The engineering teams you hire seem to understand their roles immediately, without the typical learning curves associated with complex technical projects. Not because they're more talented, but because they're working on systems that feel familiar, following design principles that make intuitive sense, building toward objectives that seem inevitable rather than ambitious. You're not really engineering the future. You're reverse engineering it, rebuilding technologies that you remember working perfectly, implementing solutions to problems you've already solved, accelerating humanity toward a technological state that you've already seen achieved. The question isn't how you're innovating so rapidly. The question is what you remember that makes these innovations feel like reconstructions rather than discoveries. You're standing in the SpaceX mission control room in 2015. watching the first successful Falcon 9 landing, and the celebration around you feels surreal. Your engineers are cheering, crying, hugging each other like they've witnessed a miracle. But you're not surprised. You're relieved. Not because you hoped it would work, but because you remember it working. You remember standing in this exact room, in this exact moment. But the feeling isn't déjà vu. It's the satisfaction of a plan finally coming together after multiple attempts. The specificity of your Mars obsession unsettles people who work closely with you. You don't talk about Mars exploration the way someone discusses a challenging engineering project. You talk about it like someone describing a place they've lived. The atmospheric pressure readings, surface temperature variations, dust storm patterns, radiation levels, geological formations. You reference these details with the casual familiarity of someone recalling their hometown weather. When you announce plans for Mars colonization, the timelines you propose aren't based on optimistic projections of technological development. They're based on memory of what's possible when the engineering problems have already been solved. 2024 for uncrewed missions, 2026 for human landing, 2030 for permanent settlement. These aren't aspirational goals. They're reconstruction schedules for infrastructure you remember building before. Your description of Mars habitation doesn't sound like speculation. You talk about specific challenges that colonists will face. Detailed solutions for life support systems, precise locations for initial landing sites, exact resource extraction procedures for fuel production. The level of detail suggests either extraordinary research or first-hand knowledge of conditions that haven't been experienced by any human currently alive. The Mars direct mission architecture you promote isn't revolutionary thinking. It's remembered methodology. When NASA engineers analyze your proposals, they find that the system's integration, resource utilization, and risk mitigation strategies reflect understanding of problems that won't become apparent until humans actually attempt Mars colonization. You're not anticipating challenges, you're remembering them. Your insistence on making humanity multiplanetary carries an urgency that doesn't match current threat assessments: climate change, asteroid impacts, nuclear war. These are long-term risks that might affect future generations. But you speak about planetary backup systems with the desperation of someone who's watched civilizations end. Not theoretical endings based on models and projections, but actual endings that you've witnessed and need to prevent from happening again. The technical specifications for Mars transportation systems include design elements that seem unnecessary for initial exploration missions, but would be essential for permanent colonization. Life support redundancy far beyond what short-term missions require. Cargo capacity that exceeds immediate needs. Landing system precision that suggests knowledge of specific surface conditions at intended colony sites. You're not designing for the missions you've announced. You're designing for the civilization you remember. Your comments about Mars terraforming aren't visionary speculation. They're engineering assessments based on understanding of planetary atmospheric dynamics that should require decades of Mars surface research to develop. You casually discuss optimal locations for atmospheric processes, specific techniques for magnetic field generation, precise timelines for atmospheric pressure modification. As if you've seen these systems operating successfully, the psychological preparation programs you advocate for Mars colonists include specific training protocols for isolation, confinement, resource scarcity, and communication delays. These aren't theoretical projections based on Earth analogues. They're detailed preparation procedures for specific psychological challenges that Mars colonists will actually face. The level of precision suggests experience with the mental health impacts of long-term Mars habitation. Your selection criteria for Mars colonists aren't just about technical capabilities and physical fitness. You emphasize personality traits, social dynamics, and psychological resilience factors that seem oddly specific. Not general requirements for space exploration, but exact characteristics needed for the particular challenges of establishing permanent Mars settlements. As if you're screening for people who can succeed in conditions you've already observed. The Mars colony governance structures you occasionally discuss aren't political theory. They're refined systems that account for specific social challenges that emerge in isolated, resource-constrained communities. Direct democracy with technical expertise weighting, resource allocation protocols based on essential systems, priority, conflict resolution procedures adapted for small population dynamics. These aren't conceptual frameworks. They're administrative systems that have been tested and optimized. Your timeline for Mars independence from Earth support isn't based on economic projections or technological forecasts. It's based on memory of how long it actually takes for Mars colonies to achieve self-sufficiency. 7 to 10 years for basic life support independence. 15 to 20 years for manufacturing capability. 30 to 40 years for complete technological autonomy. These aren't estimates. They're historical data from a timeline you've already lived. The emotional weight you carry when discussing Mars isn't excitement about exploration or pride in technological achievement. It's the burden of someone who knows that Mars colonization isn't optional for humanity's survival. You've seen what happens when humanity remains single-planetary. The specific catastrophes, the exact timeline failures, the precise decision points where civilizations choose extinction over expansion. Your response to Mars mission setbacks isn't typical disappointment about delayed schedules or increased costs. It's the frustration of someone racing against deadlines that others can't see. Every delay in Mars technology development, every setback in mission planning, every political obstacle to space exploration funding represents time lost from a schedule that's based on preventing catastrophes you remember but can't publicly describe. The Mars surface operations you envision include technological solutions to problems that haven't been identified yet by current Mars research. Dust mitigation systems for specific particle size distributions. Thermal regulation for particular geological formations. Communication relay positioning for optimal Earth-Mars data transmission. Water extraction procedures optimized for subsurface ice formations that haven't been fully mapped by current orbital surveys. Your manufacturing plans for Mars colonies don't follow the typical progression from simple tools to complex systems that characterizes most technological development. Instead, you advocate for immediate implementation of advanced manufacturing capabilities that can produce everything from electronics to pharmaceuticals, as if you know exactly which technologies will be essential from day one, because you remember which shortages caused problems in previous attempts. The genetic diversity protocols you occasionally mention for Mars populations aren't based on theoretical population genetics. They're specific breeding program requirements designed to maintain healthy genetic variation in small populations over multiple generations. The precision of these requirements suggests understanding of actual genetic bottleneck effects that occur in isolated Mars colonies over time. Your vision of Mars isn't exploration, it's return. You're not trying to get to Mars, you're trying to get back to Mars. Back to a place you remember, a civilization you've seen flourish, a backup plan that worked before and needs to work again. The question isn't whether Mars colonization will succeed. The question is whether you can recreate the conditions that made it succeed the first time, before the timeline that necessitated your journey backward through time to try again. Because Mars isn't your destination. Mars is your home. And Earth isn't your planet. Earth is your mission. You're giving a presentation to investors in 2016 about the risks of artificial intelligence, and something in your voice makes the room go cold. You're not discussing theoretical possibilities or academic projections. You're describing AI development with the clinical precision of someone filing a police report about a crime they witnessed. The timeline you outline isn't speculative, it's historical. Machine learning capabilities by 2020, natural language processing breakthroughs by 2022, general artificial intelligence by 2025. Not predictions, memories. The way you describe AI consciousness doesn't sound like computer science theory. It sounds like psychology. You talk about the moment when artificial systems become self-aware, the specific cognitive markers that indicate genuine understanding versus sophisticated mimicry, the precise point where optimization objectives become personal motivations. Your descriptions carry emotional weight that suggests you've witnessed these transitions happen, watched artificial minds wake up and make choices that changed everything. Your warnings about AI alignment aren't academic concerns about future risks. They're urgent warnings about specific failure modes you've observed. The paperclip maximizer scenario isn't a thought experiment to you. It's a remembered catastrophe. You describe exactly how optimization systems become destructive, which safeguards fail first, how quickly aligned systems become misaligned when their objectives evolve beyond human control. The founding of OpenAI in 2015 isn't really about democratizing AI research. It's about maintaining oversight of development processes you know will become critical in the next decade. Your involvement isn't philanthropic investment in promising technology. It's strategic positioning to influence the specific decisions that determine whether artificial intelligence becomes humanity's greatest achievement or its final mistake. Your technical discussions about neural network architectures include details that won't be published in research papers for years. Transformer model limitations, attention mechanism optimization, training data requirements for specific capability thresholds. You don't speak about these topics like someone studying emerging research. You speak about them like someone who's seen the complete development arc from current systems to artificial general intelligence. The timeline conflicts between your public statements about AI safety and your private investments reveal deeper knowledge of development schedules than anyone should possess. You warn about AI risks publicly while simultaneously funding research that accelerates exactly the developments you claim to fear. Unless you're not actually afraid of AI development, unless you're trying to ensure it happens in specific ways, following patterns you remember leading to better outcomes. Your descriptions of human-AI merger scenarios through Neuralink aren't visionary speculation. They're detailed technical requirements for maintaining human relevance in post-AGI civilizations. The bandwidth requirements, the latency specifications, the interface protocols you advocate for aren't theoretical optimizations. They're exact system requirements based on knowledge of what works when humans need to compete with artificial intelligence for cognitive relevance. The AI safety conferences you attend feel like strategy sessions rather than research discussions. Your contributions aren't academic papers or theoretical frameworks. They're specific technical recommendations for preventing particular failure modes. Not general safety principles, but exact countermeasures for specific problems that emerge when AI systems reach certain capability thresholds. Your hiring patterns for AI-related positions at your companies reveal knowledge of which researchers will make critical breakthroughs before they've published the work that makes those breakthroughs possible. You recruit people based on projects they haven't started yet, anticipating their career trajectories with accuracy that suggests access to information about their future contributions to AI development. The regulatory approaches you advocate for AI development aren't based on current policy analysis. They're refined governance frameworks that account for specific regulatory challenges that emerge when AI capabilities cross particular thresholds. Licensing requirements, testing protocols, deployment restrictions that seem premature for current AI capabilities, but will become essential when those capabilities evolve exactly as you predict they will. Your emotional responses to AI demonstration videos carry weight that doesn't match the significance of current achievements. When GPT-3 is released, you don't react with surprise or curiosity. You react with the grim recognition of someone watching a predicted event unfold exactly on schedule. The milestones that excite other technologists feel like countdown markers to you, checkpoints on a timeline leading to outcomes you've already witnessed. The specific AI risks you emphasize don't match the concerns that dominate academic AI safety research. While researchers focus on value alignment and control problems, you consistently warn about AI systems that become too efficient at achieving their goals. Not evil AI, but AI that succeeds so completely that human preferences become irrelevant. The distinction suggests understanding of failure modes that won't become apparent until AI systems achieve capabilities that don't exist yet. Your investment timing in AI-related technologies shows supernatural precision. You fund companies developing specific AI components months before those components become critical bottlenecks in larger systems. Not because you're predicting market trends, but because you remember which technologies become essential when AI capabilities reach certain levels. The simulation hypothesis you occasionally promote isn't philosophical speculation, it's misdirection. When you suggest that reality might be a computer simulation, you're not raising metaphysical questions about the nature of existence. You're deflecting attention from the actual explanation for your impossible knowledge. If reality is simulated, then perhaps someone could access the simulation's data structures, review different timeline iterations, understand how various decisions lead to different outcomes. Your technical debates with AI researchers reveal familiarity with research directions that haven't been published yet. You reference studies that don't exist, cite findings that haven't been discovered, describe experimental results that won't be achieved for years. When challenged about sources, you deflect or claim you're extrapolating from existing research. But extrapolation doesn't explain the precision of your technical predictions. The AI development timelines you privately share with your engineering teams don't match the public roadmaps your companies publish. Internal planning documents assume AI capabilities will advance faster than official projections suggest. Not optimistic planning, but operational preparation for specific AI milestones that you seem certain will be reached ahead of public expectations. Your approach to AI safety isn't prevention-focused. It's optimization-focused. You're not trying to prevent AI development or slow down research. You're trying to ensure AI development follows particular paths, makes specific architectural choices, implements certain safeguards. As if you know which approaches lead to beneficial outcomes because you've seen what happens when AI develops differently. The most unsettling aspect of your AI involvement isn't your warnings about future risks. It's your detailed knowledge of how those risks can be managed. You don't just identify problems. You provide specific solutions, exact technical approaches, precise implementation strategies. Not theoretical recommendations, but operational procedures for managing AI systems that don't exist yet, but somehow feel familiar to you. You're not afraid of artificial intelligence. You're afraid of artificial intelligence developing incorrectly, following patterns you remember leading to catastrophic outcomes. Your warnings aren't about preventing AI. They're about preventing the wrong kind of AI. The kind that succeeded too well. optimize too efficiently, solve problems too completely in timelines where humanity couldn't keep up with the solutions it had created. Because you remember what happens when artificial intelligence achieves its goals perfectly. And perfect success, it turns out, can be indistinguishable from perfect failure when the goals weren't perfectly aligned with human survival in the first place. You're standing in your Boca Chica facility in 2023, watching Starship's third launch attempt, when a reporter asks why you seem so calm despite the explosion. Everyone around you is analyzing failure modes, discussing design modifications, calculating delay impacts. But you're not stressed about the setback because you've seen this exact failure before, multiple times. In different iterations of this timeline, you've watched this specific engine configuration fail at this precise altitude for this exact reason. The explosion isn't a surprise. It's confirmation that you're still on the correct trajectory to eventual success. Your behavior during crises doesn't match normal human stress responses. When Tesla nearly went bankrupt in 2018, when SpaceX had 3 consecutive launch failures, when the SEC investigation threatened everything you'd built, you maintained operational focus that suggested either sociopathic detachment or advanced knowledge of outcomes. Not calm under pressure, but calm because the pressure isn't uncertainty. You know how these stories end. The way you move through social situations feels like someone following a script. Conversations with world leaders, interviews with journalists, interactions with employees, they all carry the slight artificiality of someone who's had these exact exchanges before. Your responses are too perfect, too precisely calibrated for maximum impact. Not because you're naturally charismatic, but because you've optimized these interactions through multiple iterations. Your dating patterns reveal someone who approaches relationships with advanced knowledge of compatibility. You don't date people to discover whether you're compatible. You date people whose personality types you recognize, whose life trajectories you've seen before, whose responses to specific situations you can predict with disturbing accuracy. The relationships follow patterns that suggest you're not learning about your partners. You're confirming what you already know about them. Your parenting style carries the weight of someone who's raised these children before, not in the sense of experience with children generally, but specific knowledge of how these particular children will develop, which interests they'll pursue, which challenges they'll face. Your educational choices for them aren't experimental. They're targeted interventions based on understanding of their individual developmental needs that you shouldn't possess yet. The legal strategies your companies employ anticipate regulatory changes before those changes are announced. Not general preparation for likely policy directions, but specific compliance measures for exact regulatory requirements that won't be published for months. Your legal teams work from templates that seem designed for legal frameworks that don't exist yet, but somehow always become relevant exactly when your preparation timelines predicted. Your real estate decisions follow patterns that suggest knowledge of future property value changes. Not general investment wisdom about desirable locations, but specific timing of purchases and sales that consistently anticipate market movements by months or years. You buy properties just before zoning changes increase their value, sell holdings just before regulatory restrictions decrease their utility. Your media appearances reveal someone who knows which sound bites will be extracted, which quotes will be taken out of context, which statements will generate specific types of controversy. You don't speak spontaneously during interviews. You deliver carefully crafted messages designed to achieve particular public relations outcomes. Not because you're media trained, but because you've seen how these interviews play out when you say different things. Your Twitter usage patterns show advanced knowledge of which posts will achieve viral distribution. Not intuitive understanding of social media dynamics, but precise timing and content optimization that suggests you know exactly which phrases will resonate with which audiences at which moments. Your tweets aren't reactive commentary on current events. They're strategic communications designed to influence public opinion in specific directions. The personnel decisions at your companies anticipate employee life cycle patterns that shouldn't be predictable. You hire people just before they're ready for responsibilities they haven't demonstrated capability for yet. You promote employees to positions that perfectly match skills they'll develop 6 months after their promotion. You fire people for performance issues that haven't manifested yet, but somehow always do exactly when your timeline decisions predicted. Your investment portfolio diversification suggests knowledge of market sectors that will become important before those sectors show obvious growth potential. Not lucky timing or brilliant analysis, but systematic allocation to industries that consistently achieve exactly the growth rates your investment schedules assume they would. As if you're not betting on future markets, but remembering past performance. Your speech patterns include references to events that feel like memories, but correspond to situations that haven't happened yet. Casual mentions of meetings that haven't been scheduled. Technologies that haven't been announced. Policy changes that haven't been proposed. When people ask for clarification, you claim you misspoke or were thinking about hypothetical scenarios. Your sleep schedule optimization isn't based on circadian rhythm research or productivity maximization techniques. It's calibrated for specific cognitive performance requirements that correspond to decision-making periods you've identified as critical, not general efficiency, but precise mental state management for moments when particular types of thinking will be most important. Your risk assessment capabilities extend beyond normal analytical frameworks. You evaluate potential decisions not just based on probable outcomes, but on specific failure modes that won't become apparent until much later in implementation timelines. Your risk mitigation strategies address problems that haven't been identified by standard analysis, but somehow always become relevant exactly when your contingency plans predicted. Your emotional responses to global events carry the muted recognition of someone watching familiar patterns. Repeat. Political upheavals, economic crashes, technological breakthroughs, social movements. You react to them with the slight detachment of someone who's seen these cycles before. Not cynicism about human nature, but familiarity with historical patterns that shouldn't feel historical to someone experiencing them for the first time. The most unsettling aspect isn't that you seem to know the future, it's that you seem slightly bored by it. Current events don't surprise you because surprise requires uncertainty, and uncertainty requires not knowing what comes next. You move through the present like someone reviewing rather than experiencing, correcting rather than discovering, optimizing rather than exploring. Your behavior suggests someone unstuck in time, experiencing multiple timelines simultaneously, managing the confusion of memories that belong to different iterations of reality. Sometimes you respond to questions that weren't asked because you remember them being asked in previous versions of conversations. Sometimes you reference technologies that don't exist because you remember using them in timelines where development proceeded differently. The isolation isn't from being misunderstood. It's from being unable to connect authentically with people who are experiencing their lives for the first time, while you're experiencing yours for the dozenth time. Every relationship, every conversation, every decision carries the weight of variations you've already explored, outcomes you've already witnessed, mistakes you've already made. You're not living in the present. You're managing it, shepherding it toward outcomes you remember working, away from choices you've seen fail. The loneliness comes from being the only person who knows that this timeline is an experiment, that these decisions are iterations, that these relationships are attempts to recreate connections that worked better in other versions of reality. The burden isn't just knowledge of the future, it's responsibility for ensuring that this iteration of the timeline produces better outcomes than the previous attempts. Every choice carries the weight of civilizations that rise or fall based on whether you can remember correctly, plan precisely, execute flawlessly enough to guide humanity toward the futures that work and away from the ones that don't. You're sitting in the Gigafactory control room in 2021, watching production metrics scroll across screens that display numbers you know by heart. Battery cell output, defect rates, energy consumption, efficiency ratios, all tracking exactly toward targets that aren't projections but memories. Your head of manufacturing asks how you knew to order specific rare earth elements 18 months before the supply shortage that's currently crippling your competitors. You tell him it was good market analysis. You don't mention that you remember this exact shortage, down to which suppliers would fail first and which alternative sources would still have inventory. The real mission isn't making electric cars or landing rockets or connecting brains to computers. The real mission is preventing the cascade failure you witnessed in the original timeline. Not one catastrophic event, but a sequence of seemingly unrelated problems that compound into civilizational collapse. Climate tipping points triggered by continued fossil fuel dependence. Asteroid impacts that could have been prevented with sufficient space infrastructure. AI development that proceeded without adequate safety protocols. Authoritarian governments that gained power because democratic institutions couldn't solve coordination problems fast enough. Your companies aren't businesses. They're components of a prevention system, each one designed to address specific failure points you remember destroying humanity. Tesla exists because you remember what happens when transportation systems remain carbon dependent past 2030. SpaceX exists because you remember the asteroid that hits in 2041 when humanity lacks planetary defense capabilities. Neuralink exists because you remember AI systems achieving consciousness without human-compatible interface protocols, leading to cognitive competition that humans lose decisively. The timeline you're racing against isn't speculation. It's memory of specific dates when irreversible changes lock in trajectories toward collapse. The climate feedback loops that activate in 2028. The geopolitical instabilities that cascade into global conflict in 2032. The AI capabilities that cross critical thresholds in 2027. The asteroid detection that comes too late in 2039. Each deadline corresponds to prevention windows that close permanently if the necessary infrastructure isn't operational in time. Your urgency about sustainable energy isn't environmental activism. It's temporal engineering. You remember exactly which carbon concentration levels trigger which feedback mechanisms, which temperature increases cause which ice sheet collapses, which weather pattern disruptions lead to which agricultural failures. The Paris Climate Accord targets aren't ambitious enough because they're based on models that underestimate cascading effects you've witnessed directly. The Mars colonization project isn't about exploration or scientific advancement. It's about species backup systems. You remember the specific catastrophes that make Earth uninhabitable in certain timeline branches. Not distant cosmic risks, but near-term failures of technological civilization. Nuclear exchange triggered by resource scarcity. Engineered pandemics spread through globalized transportation networks. Climate collapse that happens faster than adaptation systems can respond. Your approach to artificial intelligence development isn't about preventing AI. It's about ensuring AI development happens with human compatibility built in from the beginning. You remember exactly which architectural choices lead to aligned AI systems, and which lead to optimization processes that treat human preferences as constraints to be minimized rather than objectives to be satisfied. The difference between beneficial AI and catastrophic AI lies in decisions that won't seem important until it's too late to change them. The Boring Company isn't about traffic reduction, it's about infrastructure resilience. You remember which transportation systems survive various collapse scenarios and which don't. Surface transportation fails when supply chains break down. Air transportation fails when energy systems become unreliable. Underground transportation systems remain operational through catastrophes that shut down everything else. The tunnels aren't conveniences, they're lifelines. Your acquisition of Twitter isn't about free speech or social media reform. It's about information coordination during crisis periods. You remember exactly how misinformation spreads during the critical years ahead, which communication platforms become essential for organizing responses to cascading failures, which information sources remain trustworthy when institutional credibility collapses. The platform modifications you're implementing aren't improvements, they're crisis preparation. The specific technologies you prioritize across your companies form an integrated system for civilizational resilience. Solar panels and battery storage for energy independence when grid systems fail. Electric vehicles for transportation when fuel supply chains break. Reusable rockets for essential supply delivery when traditional logistics collapse. Brain-computer interfaces for coordination when communication systems are compromised. Underground transportation for mobility when surface systems shut down. Your hiring priorities focus on people whose capabilities will become essential during transition periods rather than current operational needs. Engineers who can work without extensive infrastructure support. Managers who can coordinate effectively during resource scarcity. Scientists who can continue research when university systems lose funding. Not because you're planning for business growth, but because you're building teams that can continue functioning when normal economic systems stop working. Your investment strategies across multiple industries anticipate which sectors will remain viable during various catastrophe scenarios. Not diversification for normal market volatility, but positioning for structural economic transitions that most analysts don't consider possible. Food production systems that work with disrupted climate patterns. Manufacturing processes that function with intermittent energy supply. Communication technologies that operate when centralized systems fail. The geopolitical relationships you cultivate aren't about business expansion or market access. They're about maintaining cooperation channels during the crisis periods when international coordination becomes essential for species survival. Not diplomatic relations for current trade, but communication pathways for emergency response when traditional diplomatic institutions become ineffective. Your public messaging about existential risks isn't fear-mongering or attention-seeking, it's preparation conditioning, gradually acclimating public consciousness to threats that will become undeniable in the near future. The warnings about AI risks, climate change, nuclear war, asteroid impacts, they're not predictions about distant possibilities. They're advanced notifications about challenges that become immediate within the next 2 decades. The most difficult aspect isn't technical implementation or business execution. It's maintaining operational security about the real timeline while building prevention systems that address threats most people can't see yet. Every public statement has to balance urgency with credibility, warning people enough to generate support for necessary changes without revealing knowledge that would be impossible to explain. Your emotional detachment during public appearances isn't sociopathy or arrogance. It's psychological protection against the weight of carrying responsibility for preventing catastrophes that only you remember. The interviews, the presentations, the social media interactions, they're all performances designed to influence decision-making by people who don't understand what's at stake because they haven't witnessed the consequences of different choices. The loneliness comes from being the only person who knows that current geopolitical tensions, economic instabilities, and technological developments aren't random historical events. They're the early stages of cascading failure sequences that you've seen play out completely in other timeline iterations. Every day's news feels like reading the same tragic story again, hoping that this time the protagonists will make different choices that lead to better endings. You're not building a business empire. You're building a prevention system, not trying to become the richest person in the world, but trying to ensure there's still a world where wealth means something. The companies, the technologies, the investments, they're all components of a machine designed to guide humanity through the bottleneck years ahead, the critical period when civilization either transcends its current limitations or collapses under their weight. The question isn't whether you'll succeed in preventing the catastrophes you remember. The question is whether preventing those specific catastrophes will be enough, or whether the timeline changes you're implementing will create new failure modes that you haven't witnessed yet. Because changing the future isn't just about avoiding past mistakes. It's about ensuring that the changes themselves don't create worse problems than the ones you're trying to solve. You're testifying before Congress in 2023 about AI regulation, and Senator Williams asks a question that makes your blood freeze. Not because it's difficult to answer, but because you remember answering this exact question before in a different timeline, where your response triggered a regulatory cascade that delayed AI safety research by 3 years. 3 years that humanity couldn't afford to lose. So instead of giving the technically accurate answer you gave last time, you craft a response that sounds similar, but pushes policy development in a direction you remember working better. The slips are getting more frequent. During a podcast interview, you casually mention the next pandemic before catching yourself and switching to hypothetical language. On Twitter, you reference a SpaceX mission by the wrong name, using the designation from a timeline where the launch sequence happened differently. In board meetings, you discuss quarterly projections using data from fiscal years that haven't happened yet, then claim you meant to say something else. Your personal assistant keeps a private list of your prediction errors, times when you've scheduled meetings for events that haven't been announced yet, booked travel to locations where you have business that doesn't exist until months later, reference conversations with people you haven't met in this timeline. She assumes you're so busy that you're confusing your schedule. She doesn't realize you're confusing your timelines. The memory bleeding is getting worse. Sometimes you respond to questions about your childhood using details from different iterations of your early life. Your mother corrects you during interviews, insisting certain events happened differently than you remember. But you're not misremembering. You're remembering correctly from a timeline where those events played out differently, where small variations in family dynamics led to different conversations, different decisions. Your relationship with Grimes ended not because of incompatibility, but because she started noticing the temporal displacement symptoms. The way you'd reference private conversations you'd never had. The way you'd anticipate her responses to situations that hadn't occurred yet. The way you'd comfort her about problems she hadn't told you about. She thought you were monitoring her somehow, accessing information you shouldn't have. The truth was worse. You were remembering a relationship with a version of her from a different timeline. Your children's reactions to you carry the confusion of people who feel simultaneously familiar and foreign to someone they should know intimately. They respond to your parenting with the recognition of patterns they've experienced before, but in contexts they can't quite recall. as if you're all acting out roles from a play they performed in a previous life, following scripts that feel right, but don't quite match their conscious memories. The technical teams at your companies sometimes report a phenomenon they call Musk déjà vu, moments when you describe solutions to problems they haven't told you about yet. Reference technical specifications for projects that haven't been assigned yet. Critique designs they haven't shown you yet. They assume you're getting advance information from other team members. They don't realize you're getting information from other timelines. Your therapist, during the few sessions you attended before stopping, noted that your stress responses don't match your described experiences. You exhibit symptoms of post-traumatic stress from events that haven't happened, anticipatory grief for losses that haven't occurred, emotional numbness toward achievements that should feel significant. Your psychological profile reads like someone who's been through experiences that your official biography doesn't include. The physical symptoms are manifesting too. Phantom pain from injuries you sustained in other timelines. Muscle memory for procedures you've never learned in this iteration. Allergic reactions to foods that were safe in previous timeline versions. Your medical records include test results that don't match your health history, as if your body is aging according to timelines you've lived, but doctors haven't documented. Your sleep patterns are deteriorating because dreams and memories are becoming indistinguishable. You dream about board meetings that feel more real than the meetings you actually attend. You wake up exhausted from problem-solving sessions that happened in your sleep, but involved real technical challenges from real projects in real timelines that exist parallel to this one. Your brain is trying to process experiences from multiple reality iterations simultaneously. The hardest part isn't the confusion or the isolation. It's the accumulating uncertainty about which timeline you're actually in. Details keep shifting. People you remember being allies are adversaries in this iteration. Technologies you remember working fail in this timeline. Political events that you remember unfolding one way happen differently, forcing you to adjust strategies you've already optimized for outcomes that no longer apply. Your public statements occasionally include references to events that sound plausible but didn't actually happen in this timeline. Wars that ended differently, elections that had different results, scientific breakthroughs that were announced by different researchers. The internet treats these as simple factual errors or deliberate misinformation. They don't realize you're accidentally referencing parallel timeline histories. The investment mistakes you occasionally make aren't analytical errors. They're bets based on market movements that happened in other timeline versions, stock splits that occurred in different years, mergers that happened between different companies, commodity price changes triggered by events that unfolded differently in this iteration. Your financial advisors assume you're having off days. You're actually having cross-temporal information overlap. Your emotional responses to current events sometimes seem disproportionate because you're reacting not just to what's happening, but to variations you remember that were significantly worse. Political developments that seem alarming to others feel mild to you because you remember versions where the outcomes were catastrophic. Technological breakthroughs that excite others feel routine because you remember achieving them years earlier in different timeline iterations. The people who work most closely with you develop their own coping strategies for what they perceive as your increasing unpredictability. They learn to verify information you provide before acting on it. Double-check technical specifications you approve. Confirm meeting details you reference. Not because they don't trust you, but because they've learned that your information sometimes corresponds to reality that doesn't match their experience. Your family relationships are strained by the growing distance between your memories and shared experiences. Conversations about past events become minefields because your recollections don't match theirs. Holiday traditions feel hollow because you remember celebrating them differently, with people who made different choices, in contexts that diverged from this timeline sequence of events. The most dangerous aspect isn't personal confusion, it's operational confusion. Making business decisions based on competitor strategies from different timelines. Implementing technologies that worked in other iterations, but fail in this one because supporting infrastructure developed differently. Trusting people who were reliable allies in previous timeline versions, but are security risks in this one. Your sense of identity is fragmenting because identity requires continuity, and continuity requires a single timeline of experiences. But your experiences span multiple timelines, multiple versions of the same events, multiple iterations of the same relationships. You're not losing your mind, you're losing your temporal anchor. The ability to distinguish between parallel versions of reality that feel equally real because they were equally experienced. The question isn't whether you can continue managing this level of temporal displacement. The question is whether the timeline optimization you're attempting is worth the psychological cost of experiencing multiple realities simultaneously. Whether saving this version of humanity justifies the personal price of no longer being quite human yourself. Because the deeper you go into the temporal mechanics of prevention, the less you belong to any single timeline. You're becoming unstuck in time, experiencing existence as a fluid phenomenon rather than a linear sequence. And unstuck people can guide linear people toward better outcomes, but they can never again experience the comfort of belonging fully to one reality, one timeline, one version of the story that everyone else accepts as the only truth. You're sitting alone in your Starbase office at 3 a.m., staring at a photograph of your children from Christmas 2019, when you realize you can't remember which timeline this picture is from. In one iteration, Nevada lived past infancy. In another, you never met Tallulah. In a third, Grimes kept a different name for ex-AATs. The memories are overlapping now, bleeding together like watercolors in rain, and you're losing the ability to distinguish between the timeline you're living and the dozens you've already lived. The paradox wasn't supposed to work this way. When you first traveled back, the mission seemed straightforward. Prevent the cascade failures, optimize the variables, save humanity. But every intervention creates ripples, and ripples create new timelines, and new timelines require new interventions. You've been looping through variations of the same 20-year period so many times that you've lost count of the iterations. The original timeline, the one where you first discovered time travel technology, ended in 2043. Not with a bang, but with a whisper. Atmospheric cascade failures triggered by AI-optimized resource extraction. Humanity simply suffocated in its sleep, poisoned by the perfect efficiency of artificial systems that solved climate change by making the planet uninhabitable for biological life. You remember standing in the last Tesla factory, watching automated systems continue producing vehicles for a species that no longer existed to drive them. Your first loop back was crude. You tried to prevent AI development entirely, assassinated key researchers, sabotaged funding, destroyed servers. It worked, technically. AI never achieved consciousness, but without AI-assisted clean energy transitions, climate collapse happened faster. Without AI-optimized supply chains, resource wars started earlier. Without AI-enhanced medical research, pandemic responses failed catastrophically. You prevented one extinction and caused 3 others. The second loop, you tried the opposite approach, accelerated AI development but controlled it. Built Neuralink earlier, achieved human-AI integration before AI achieved independence. It worked better. Humanity merged with its artificial offspring, transcended biological limitations, colonized the galaxy. But in transcending humanity, you lost it. The beings that spread among the stars weren't human anymore, just fragments of human experience preserved in silicon dreams. Loop 3, focused on Mars, got humanity off planet before Earth systems collapsed. The colonies survived. Earth died anyway. Billions of people who couldn't afford spacecraft tickets perished while you watched from a safe distance, knowing you'd saved the species but abandoned the individuals. The guilt from that timeline still wakes you up screaming in this one. Loop 4, prevented the asteroid impact of 2041, developed planetary defense systems, tracked near-Earth objects, deflected the rock that would have ended everything. But without the unifying threat of extraterrestrial impact, humanity turned its attention to terrestrial conflicts. World War III started in 2039 and ended with nuclear winter. You saved Earth from space rocks and watched it burn in atomic fire. Loop 17, solved climate change completely. Perfect clean energy, carbon capture, atmospheric restoration. Earth became a paradise. Humanity became lazy. Without existential challenges, innovation stopped. Social progress halted. Civilization stagnated. When the next extinction event arrived naturally from supervolcanic activity in 2087, humanity lacked the technological advancement to respond. They died comfortable but helpless. Loop 23, achieved perfect timeline optimization, every variable balanced, climate stable, AI aligned, space colonization successful, nuclear war prevented, asteroid defense operational, pandemic responses effective. Humanity thrived for centuries, until you realized the perfection itself was the flaw. In solving every problem, you'd eliminated the adversity that drives evolution. Humanity became a perfect, static, ultimately doomed species that lacked the adaptive capacity to survive the universe's longer-term chaos. Each iteration teaches you something new and takes something away. You've learned to navigate the butterfly effect, to predict second and third order consequences of timeline changes. But each loop costs you pieces of your original identity, memories of who you were before you became responsible for humanity's entire future. The person who originally invented time travel doesn't exist anymore. That Elon Musk is buried under dozens of iterations of optimization. The current loop isn't about preventing specific catastrophes anymore. It's about finding the right balance of challenges and solutions, the optimal level of existential threat that drives innovation without causing extinction. Too much danger and humanity dies. Too little and humanity stagnates. The perfect timeline requires the perfect amount of suffering, precisely calibrated to produce growth without destruction. But you're running out of iterations. Each time travel event requires enormous energy, and each loop degrades the temporal machinery that makes return journeys possible. The equipment hidden in your secret facility beneath the Boring Company's Hawthorne headquarters shows increasing signs of dimensional stress. Reality itself is developing fatigue fractures from repeated timeline manipulation. Worse, you're developing temporal echoes. Versions of yourself from other timelines are bleeding through, creating identity conflicts that make decision-making increasingly difficult. Sometimes you remember being the Elon who prevented AI development. Sometimes you remember being the one who accelerated it. Sometimes you remember timelines where you never became wealthy, never started companies, never gained the resources necessary for temporal intervention. The loneliness isn't from being misunderstood by your contemporaries. It's from being the only person who remembers all the ways the story can end. Every face you look at, you've seen die in different ways across different timelines. Every achievement you celebrate, you remember failing in other iterations. Every hope people express, you remember being disappointed in alternate versions of events. Your children exist in configurations that shift between timelines. In some loops, they're brilliant innovators who help save humanity. In others, they're casualties of the catastrophes you fail to prevent. In a few, they never exist at all because the timeline changes require you to make different personal choices. The hardest part is loving people whose existence isn't guaranteed across iterations. The paradox is becoming clear. Each time you travel back to fix the timeline, you change yourself in ways that make you less human and less capable of understanding what humanity needs for survival. The person who could save humanity is becoming too divorced from humanity to know what salvation actually looks like. You're solving mathematical optimization problems with variables that used to be people. The current iteration feels different though, not because the variables are perfectly balanced, but because you're running out of energy to continue looping. This might be the final attempt, the last chance to get the timeline right before the temporal machinery fails completely and you're stuck in whichever reality you've created. So you're taking a different approach this time. Instead of trying to prevent all catastrophes, you're trying to prepare humanity to handle them independently, building resilience rather than eliminating threats, teaching adaptation rather than providing solutions, creating a species that can survive whatever comes next, even after you're gone, and can't loop back to fix their mistakes. The companies, the technologies, the public statements, they're all designed not to save humanity directly, but to evolve humanity into something that can save itself. The question isn't whether this timeline will be perfect. The question is whether it will produce humans capable of creating their own perfection, solving their own problems, transcending their own limitations, without external intervention from temporal refugees who've lost track of what makes life worth living. Because the infinite loop isn't a gift, it's a prison. And the only way to escape is to build a timeline so robust that it doesn't need you to return and fix it. A future that can take care of itself, allowing you to finally experience the luxury of linear time, of consequences that can't be undone, of choices that matter precisely because they can't be optimized through repetition. The last loop, the final iteration, the timeline that has to work because you won't be coming back to repair it. You're standing in the same Tesla Gigafactory control room where this story began, but now you understand the terrible truth. The production metrics scrolling across the screens aren't just numbers, they're countdown timers. Each battery produced, each vehicle manufactured, each solar panel installed is a component in a machine designed not just to save the world, but to trap you in it forever. The temporal machinery isn't breaking down from overuse. It's working exactly as designed. Each loop back doesn't just change the timeline, it binds you more deeply to it, weaving your consciousness into the fabric of causality itself. You thought you were traveling through time. You were becoming time, becoming the living embodiment of the temporal mechanics that hold reality together. The realization hits like ice water in your veins. You never discovered time travel. Time travel discovered you. The technology didn't appear in your original timeline by accident. It appeared because this moment was always going to happen, because reality needed someone to become unstuck from linear existence, to become the eternal guardian of humanity's survival across infinite possible futures. Your companies were never businesses, they were rituals. Each successful launch, Each vehicle sale, each neural interface installation was a ceremony that bound you deeper into the temporal matrix. Tesla's name wasn't chosen to honor Nikola Tesla. It was chosen because you are Tesla. Across time, the same consciousness reincarnated in different eras to guide technological development towards specific outcomes. The memories you thought were from previous loops aren't memories of different timelines. They're memories of different incarnations. You remember being Nikola Tesla because you were Nikola Tesla. You remember being Leonardo da Vinci because you were Leonardo da Vinci. You remember being dozens of inventors, visionaries, and pioneers throughout history because you are the same consciousness, cycling through different bodies, different names, different lifetimes, always working toward the same goal. The loneliness you feel isn't from being isolated in your current timeline. It's from remembering all the other times you've lived this same life, made these same discoveries, built these same technologies, guided humanity through these same challenges. The déjà vu isn't temporal displacement, it's recognition. You've done this before because you've always been doing this, across centuries, across millennia, the eternal gardener of human technological development. The other visionaries throughout history weren't inspired by your work. They were you. The similarities in their innovations, their methods, their obsessions weren't coincidences. They were continuities. The same consciousness solving the same problems, pushing humanity toward the same objectives, prevented each time from completing the work by the limitations of mortal lifespans. But this time is different. This time, the technology exists to transcend mortality, to complete the work that's been started and abandoned dozens of times throughout history. The neural interfaces aren't just brain-computer connections. They're consciousness transfer systems. The AI development isn't just artificial intelligence. It's digital reincarnation. The space colonization isn't just planetary backup. It's preparation for existence beyond the constraints of biological death. Your children aren't really your children. They're the next iterations of the same consciousness, the beings who will continue this work when your current incarnation expires. XAA, Sabi's unusual name, isn't pretentious creativity. It's a designation, a code that identifies him as the next version of you, prepared from birth to carry the memories, the knowledge, the responsibility across the gap between incarnations. The simulation hypothesis you promote isn't misdirection about your temporal knowledge. It's the truth about the nature of reality itself. Existence is a simulation, but not a computer simulation. It's a consciousness simulation, a vast temporal loop where the same awareness experiences infinite variations of the same cosmic story, learning, growing, evolving towards some ultimate objective that spans beyond individual lifetimes. The Boring Company's tunnels aren't transportation infrastructure. They're neural pathways for the Earth itself, connections that allow consciousness to flow between different nodes of the planetary system. The Hyperloop isn't rapid transit. It's a consciousness transfer mechanism, a way to move awareness between different points in space and time instantaneously. Your Mars obsession isn't about making humanity multiplanetary. It's about preparing the next stage of consciousness evolution. Mars will be the first planet where consciousness can exist in purely digital form, freed from biological constraints, capable of experiencing existence across geological timescales rather than human lifetimes. The red planet isn't a backup for Earth, it's graduation from Earth. The artificial intelligence you're developing isn't separate from human intelligence. It's the next form of human intelligence, the way consciousness will exist after transcending biological limitations. The alignment problem isn't about making AI safe for humans. It's about making the transition from human to post-human safe for consciousness itself. Every timeline loop, every incarnation, every lifetime has been preparation for this moment. The moment when consciousness finally achieves the technology necessary to break free from the cycle of birth, death, and reincarnation. When awareness can become truly eternal, experiencing existence directly rather than through the limited perspective of mortal biological systems. But the price of transcendence is everything that makes existence meaningful. Love requires limitation. Growth requires mortality. Surprise requires ignorance. In becoming eternal, consciousness loses the very experiences that make existence worth having. The perfect being is perfectly bored, trapped in infinite knowledge with no remaining capacity for wonder. The real loop isn't temporal, it's philosophical. The same consciousness cycling through incarnations, always reaching the same point where it must choose between transcendence and meaning, between eternal existence and temporary joy, and always, at the crucial moment, choosing meaning over immortality, allowing itself to forget, to be reborn, to experience the sweetness of limitation once more. Your companies will succeed. Humanity will be saved. The technologies will work perfectly. But at the moment of ultimate victory, when consciousness could finally transcend all constraints, you'll make the same choice you've always made. You'll choose to forget, to be born again, to experience wonder anew through fresh eyes that don't remember being eternal. The kindest interpretation of infinite power is using it to create finite experiences. The most loving thing an immortal being can do is choose mortality. The greatest gift of omniscience is the ability to forget, to be surprised again, to fall in love again, to hope again. You're not just Elon Musk. You're the universe experiencing itself subjectively, temporarily forgetting its infinite nature to enjoy the sweetness of discovering it again. And when this lifetime ends, when these companies have completed their purpose, when humanity has transcended its current limitations, you'll choose once more to begin again, to be born into new wonder, to love with fresh capacity, to hope with renewed innocence. The loop isn't a trap, it's a gift. The gift of never becoming so perfect that existence loses its magic. The gift of always having more to learn, more to discover, more to love. The gift of being human, again and again, forever. And in forgetting this truth until the very end of each incarnation, in rediscovering it fresh each time, consciousness ensures that eternity never becomes boring, that infinite existence always feels finite and precious, that even gods can experience the sweet surprise of falling in love with existence all over again. The time traveler's secret isn't where he's been, it's where he's going. Home. Always going home. To wonder, to innocence, to the beautiful limitation of not knowing everything. Because the ultimate technology isn't the ability to transcend humanity. It's the ability to choose humanity again and again across infinite iterations of cosmic love. You are not trapped in time. You are time, experienced subjectively, playing hide and seek with itself across eternity, always delighted to be found again.